Hello and welcome to Heart of Many Things with your host Mike and
Tom.
Okay, so joining us today we have Aisha and Magic Mark, who is more popular than the other three of us put together on social media, I think.
You can just call me Mark.
I think Aisha might want to have a different pronunciation of her
Oh
name.
yeah, it's Aisha, like A and Shah,
Aisha.
rather than I. It's not pronounced how it's supposed to be. Blame my parents, they chose it. Do some practices.
Okay, Aisha. That's a great start. I have two guests. I got one of their names wrong, and the other one just wants to be known by their first name.
We'll just do that again.
I'm a great host. I'd be
fine,
making
it's
cups
fine.
of tea, but I'm miles
You've
away.
only seen it written down. It's just said differently.
That is true.
Yeah, it's
That
fine.
is true. Okay, so Aisha, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, other than how to pronounce your name correctly? We've got that one out of the way.
My name's Aisha. I know Tom from university. We were in the same society when I was doing my undergrad and he was doing his PhD, and we've been friends ever since then, which was a long time ago. I work as a software tester.
I see. And Mark.
But what do you want to know?
Well, who are you, Mark?
Um,
I'm assuming most of the people that will actually click this link and listen to it probably clicked it via your many followers. We've got 35 to your 2,000.
On what? Instagram?
Twitter.
I don't have Instagram. I only have Twitter.
I don't have Twitter, sorry.
I don't get
No,
Insta-
he doesn't show you his beautiful features. It's just more of his dulcet tones.
I'm Mark. I am a librarian and professional wrestling ring announcer, and I was, until a few people came out a while after me, I was the first openly gay person in British wrestling at the time. Not so much these days. They're all gay. They're not, but there's lots now.
There's a lot of spandex.
Magic Mark 2017. They're all gay. So the topic of today's conversation is going to be masculinity. We drew it out of the hat, as we always do. It was one of the things we'd put in there. And we almost called it fragile masculinity, didn't we, Tom?
Yes, that was kind of out. I suppose we were joking about it at the time.
And I mean, there's a reason we didn't do that. And I think it's that masculinity is, I really do feel, an increasingly ill-defined concept. The idea of what is masculine and what masculinity is becoming increasingly vague and ambiguous. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So should we start there? We'll touch on what is masculinity. Mark, do you want to just pick a masculine trait, one.
This is the thing. I don't care. And perhaps I don't think that's so much of a minority anymore, that I just don't care. I'm far too busy enjoying myself and doing busy things to give a monkeys what masculinity is. I happen to be a bloke, but I don't care.
And Aisha, from an outside perspective, I guess, from a female perspective, are there certain traits you think of as masculine?
I was trying to think of this earlier. I went on the Wikipedia page for masculinity, and it did feel like someone over time has just added more and more to the description to make it more and more vague. I don't know. I guess I'd assume my dad was masculine. I was like raised by mum and dad. But thinking about it, he wasn't like perhaps the most masculine of guys. So I don't really know what it is. I know what I don't.
But you have to be able to sort of have an idea of what masculine is to say that something is or isn't masculine, don't you?
Yeah, I think I know what I don't like it being, which is like aggressive manliness or like the bad sides of being like super macho.
To coin a phrase, lads, lads, lads.
Lads, and being a bit of a womanizer or not very respectful to other people, probably particularly women, I think is what I don't want masculinity to be, but what I would associate it with the word.
Okay, but do you not associate anything positive with masculinity?
Oh, being able to grow an amazing beard and cutting up wood with an axe.
Lumberjacks are the most masculine
Lumberjacks. They work all night and
it
they
is
sleep
one of those
all day.
things, isn't it? Where if someone showed you a picture, it'd be easier to say whether the picture is something masculine or not something masculine
Yes.
than it is to actually describe
Something Google's DeepMind would be good at.
A lumberjack.
it. Yeah, it's something that you see. What is the Google definition of masculine? Let's
Oh, some good typing sounds
Let's
there.
do this.
That's what we like.
Oh.
All the best podcasts have good typing voices.
having qualities or appearance traditionally associated with men.
What, so a
or
dick?
denoting a gender of nouns or adjectives. Male, sex, or gender.
See, I thought moustache.
So-
You thought
so
dicks.
is-
That's interesting.
Okay, so, well, there's a reason for that. Mark is one of the first openly gay men in British wrestling.
There are a lot of dicks
so-
in
And I'm
wrestling.
also a blunt person.
When we associate it with dick, okay, then do we not exclude attempts at transgender?
Well, no, because
Like, do we not then limit it to a sex rather than a gender role?
if they've had the op, then they've got a dick too, right?
They, you wouldn't know unless you asked, I think.
Exactly.
Or unless you took the clothes off, which you should only do with their permission.
I think defining masculinity is separate from... It doesn't matter how they define, masculinity can be a thing that is applied to actions and stuff like that.
Because, I mean, yeah, you've got physical masculinity, which I think is the first thing some of us thought of with lumberjacks, with beards, broad shoulders, etc. And then you've also got masculine behaviour. And those are two separate elements of it, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And they're kind of separated, and there's a paper we'll get onto when we get into like nature versus nurture later on. But they talk about how people have changed their view of kind of what masculinity is a bit. And I read some other papers today when I had the opportunity, and they talk about that as well. I think it's kind of... most people probably have a different definition of what masculinity is than each other.
And I think it's also really important to note that it's cultural.
Yes.
We are looking at this through a Western lens. There are cultures out there that have a completely different idea of masculinity. My long-term partner, she studied anthropology at university, and she was telling me, and I really should find out more about this and try and get it in the show notes, but that there's cultures out there where they literally alter their perception of your gender based on the tasks you perform in the social group,
That's really interesting.
and that it is just not linked to any form of biology.
That's like a fish or something, where your sex changes and depending on your social status. Clownfish, I'm thinking of.
Life finds a way.
It does. It's nothing humans do, as far as I can tell.
I mean, that's a very alien concept to the Western social structure. There are human cultures out there that have much more gender-fluid societies in terms of gender roles, even if their physical sex is very clearly defined. So, we're already touched on the fact that masculinity is incredibly hard to define. What is it and what it isn't? And there have been a lot of attempts to categorise things into gender. I think perhaps it's easier in languages that are gendered, where the language is gendered. But in English, we don't really have masculine and feminine words as outright grammatical structure. We only have it as a connotation.
I've never understood masculine and feminine in language, though. I mean, obviously I understand what it is, but if you look
But
at
why?
right, so le chat, cats are feminine, and why? You get just as many male cats as female cats. I don't understand. I don't understand why languages need masculine and feminine.
Or neutral. I think it's coming from a language that doesn't use masculine and feminine or neutral words, that we just find it harder to understand. But the way people use masculine and feminine nouns changes the way, or can change the way they think about those nouns, how they describe them. There's an example with like a key. In one language it's gendered masculine, in one language it's gendered feminine, and the words people would use to describe a key are different based on that, like heavy or small or something like that.
And I mean, we don't have a strictly gendered language in English. We have we don't have any rules regarding it, but we do have a lot of connotation. I mean, if I say certain words, you'll think of them as more masculine or more feminine, whether you realise you're doing it or not.
Definitely.
If you compare bluebells to axes,
It's bluebell is the most manly flower
yeah, and axes are the most feminine
of
of
the weapons. Exactly.
It's really clearly defined in your mind. You don't even have to think about it. If someone says hatchet, you generally picture some sort of large Vikingish bloke with an axe rather than a dainty lady in a flowery dress. This is where these connotations come in, and they're culturally enforced. I'll say we're struggling to think of things that are outright masculine, that we would say is a masculine trait. And the ones that we have done have been negative so far. So I'm gonna voice one here and see how we feel about it. Strength. How do we feel about strength as a masculine trait?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is generally seen as one, but the problem with something like... Sorry, the thing is, yeah, it's strength. Strength is a word with multiple meanings, like women who give birth are strong. Like, That's a different meaning of strong to the kind of strength I think you normally associate with masculinity, which is more kind of physical brawn, more kind of, warrior kind of connotations to me anyway. But I think there is also the kind of strength that comes from like fatherhood. And I think a lot of the things, both masculinity and femininity, are tied into how we view our parents and how that's been put into our culture.
Yeah, strength is definitely a more complex word than, I assume, like physical strength. Yes, it seems a very masculine thing. It goes with like muscles, testosterone, just a larger body shape. But it's interesting what you said about fatherhood. I don't particularly view fatherhood as a very masculine thing, even though it literally is. It's not one of the things that the way you'd think to describe it as like, oh yeah, that's one of the most masculine things you can do. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily seem like, it doesn't marry itself to the strong image. It's a different view of a person.
I think it depends as well, because I think you see cultural differences between places. Like, the idea of being a strong man can mean different things. It can mean like being stoic in the face of sadness, or it can mean just being there when you're needed for your family or whatever.
And these are all things that are expected of men in our society.
And I would like to, at this point, call bullshit on all of it. For me, a man is no more or less a man because he can show his emotions. If boys can cry too, I find the whole thing utterly boggling. Going back to the ultimate, why is it okay for girls to cry and not boys when kids are growing up? And surely kids should be raised to believe in equality rather than immediately have these gender roles forced upon them.
And no, I agree with you there, Mark. So I think these things are seen through this lens in our society. That doesn't necessarily mean that they should be. So there are things that are seen as masculine, there are things that are seen as feminine. But I think what we need to realise as a society is that just because something is seen as masculine or feminine doesn't mean it is exclusively for men or women. It's just been historically more commonly associated with one than the other. And there's absolutely no problems with moving through and past these. So I use strength as an example, and I mean that in all the ways that have been listed so far, in both physical, emotional, and mental resilience and strength. It doesn't mean that women can't be strong emotionally or physically. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are manly, but that's a part of what it means to me, and that's quite an important thing to me as a man, to try and fill these, because those are positive traits that I've seen in male role models. And that's part of why they've become tied to the essence of being a man, in my eyes. And that, like I said, that doesn't exclusively mean that they're limited to men.
No, I think we're moving away from the idea that men are masculine and women are feminine, and if you don't adhere to those stereotypes, there's something wrong with you. I think people are much more realizing there's a mix of both, and that the mix is okay. That it's a bit more complicated than, you don't have to pick one or the other. You can be both. Exactly.
As we're moving forwards with this, emotional strength can mean the strength to not give in to the fear of showing your emotions. As Mark was saying earlier, there's no reason men shouldn't be able to cry. There's no reason men shouldn't be able to express themselves. And it might be strong to be able to take it on your shoulders without unloading to other people, but it's also strong to be able to reveal your emotions and your vulnerabilities to people. That they're just various forms of strength. And that's why strength is a very vague word, but I think for me, as a man, talking about masculinity, it's quite an important one.
Yeah, I like that idea that strength is manifests itself in different ways, that emotional or revealing it, but circumstantial.
And there are lots of these traits, and most of them are going to be reinforced through various forms of media over the years, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, the traditional kind of male power fantasy you get in a lot of movies that we're slowly moving away from, but possibly should be moving away from faster, definitely kind of builds up a lot of ideas in people's heads.
So, yeah, I was saying that strength, for me, is an important trait of masculinity, but in various forms.
The point I was trying to make before I got cut off is I feel like it's almost like we're taking back the word of strength. Like, in some ways, like there have been negative connotations with that idea of strength in the past. And nowadays, as you say, strength doesn't have to mean just one thing, and it's important to recognise that, and not just in definitions of masculinity.
I mean, I'm going to expand that to Mark and Aisha, starting with Mark. Do you think strength has negative connotations?
Strength? Not necessarily. I don't see myself as particularly physically strong, but I'm reasonably mentally strong. Do they have equal value? I don't know.
Aisha, any negative traits associated?
Associate with strength?
Any negative aspects to strength?
No, I think being a strong person is a really positive thing, perhaps more so emotionally than physical, because we live in a world where you don't need to be physically strong to survive. I can't think of anything bad. Any way you could use that as an insult to a person.
Yeah, so I think I would challenge that, Tom. I don't think that strength has negative connotations, nor do I think it has done. I think it may have been used for negative things, but I don't think strength inherently has any negative connotations.
No, I don't think the word itself inherently does. I think the problem is that there's a certain ideal that has been assigned to it and like linked with it, and that is the problematic thing.
Like strength and controlling.
Yeah, like you have to...
Overlord.
Yeah, that definitely is where it ties in. That's where I'm trying to get to, essentially.
So
the word strength is not inherently a bad word.
Just for the sake of baiting the audience, Aisha, as the woman in the room, what do you see as toxic masculinity?
I have not heard this phrase before. If it's
You've never heard the phrase?
If it's a buzzword, no. I'm...
Okay, Mark, over to you.
Dickish straight blokes being dickish straight blokes, right?
Why is it always straight blokes? Do you not get dickish gay blokes that are extremely hyper-masculine?
I guess...
Surely all the dickish gay blokes aren't complete queens.
I guess so. I'm probably not your best gay for this, to be honest with you. I don't have very many gay friends. I have a long-term partner, and most of my friends are straight.
And you and I have had discussions before on gay communities and potential self-segregation. I think that'd be a good topic for another podcast.
I could talk for hours.
Just segueing on from you mentioning your friend groups. But what would you see as toxic masculinity, as a toxic masculine trait?
Just guys that don't see stuff like the fact that they've always had the advantage, and just because they have an unhappy life doesn't. It's very. I'm trying to put this in a way that doesn't make me look like a dick. Self-entitled men who seem to think that not only have women achieved equality, but have actually taken over the world, which is utter drivel. Utter drivel.
Tom, toxic masculinity.
I think, just to expand on what other people have said, it is that kind of, this idea that men can be alpha males and there's beta males, and so it's all about being strong and being on top, and that for some reason men arbitrarily deserve that. But it does tend to be a particular subset of people who believe this. It tends to be more in a kind of a Western society.
And what's the word we use for this, Tom?
Red pill.
Red pill is a term I've heard used.
Or broflakes.
Broflakes, yes, that's also true.
Broflake.
It's like a snowflake, but a bro.
I get it.
And then,
I could have got there myself.
And then there's a video I'll link in the show notes that's definitely worth watching. I think it's just simply called Alpha, but we will put that in.
For me, the easiest way to define toxic masculinity is you take a masculine trait that could otherwise be positive and you exaggerate it. It's hyper-masculinity. It's when strength becomes not a positive trait, but a goal. Strong for the sake of strong. Now, if you want to be strong, you should be strong so you can withstand what life throws at you, so you can protect people that you care about, and you can... That's what strength is for me. It creates safety. Now, toxic masculinity for me is what happens when you take some of these traits, but you apply them differently, and your strength is used outwardly and aggressively, when strength is used to dominate, not care.
That seems fair.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this idea of strength perhaps being negative comes from, Tom, that you kind of mentioned earlier, is when it's used wrongly.
Yes,
strength
exactly.
is a tool. Strength is a trait and a tool that is used to achieve things. And I think the difference between positive and toxic masculinity is what it's used to achieve.
So if strength is used to make other people weaker,
yeah.
That's the...
I mean, if you use your strength to protect and look after those people who are weaker than you in some way, whether it's mentally, emotionally, physically, that for me is an ideal to aspire to. And that's what you get. You get your Supermans, your Captain Americas, your positive male role models that we show children. And when it's used to attack people or harm people, we get Donald Trump.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we have to?
And Donald Trump is someone he's someone who is tried to be as manly as possible, but has become a caricature of it, isn't he?
I think the problem there is he probably has the wrong... His idea of manliness is ascribed to wealth and things like that, and a kind of bullish tendency. So it is this kind of toxic masculinity we're talking about. But it's like, yeah, it's power above all else and things like that without like thinking about other people, which I think is the issue.
And I mean, environments that encourage this. The army. The army is a hyper-masculine environment. It has women in it, but it is all very it's competitive to the extreme. It's about pushing yourself to the furthest you can go. And it breeds more what Mark referred to earlier as lads, and where it's derogative to anything else. Anything else is seen as lesser of some sort.
Yeah.
And that's not all soldiers. Never will I say anything is all anyone. But I mean, that's an environment that can create this. Sports teams is another one. Male sports teams can often be quite
exaggerated
like that. And in my career experience, the building trade can be like that. Areas that have had very little feminine influence can often become an exaggerated parody of masculinity, as men seem to be urged or have the desire to outman one another. And on that note with competition, I mean, how integral do we think socially competition is to masculinity, and comparing it to the way that women are socialised?
That is a big question.
Yeah, that's a question that's a podcast in and of itself. But I think, so I'm going to briefly go back to that paper I mentioned earlier. Again, this will be in the show notes. It talks about testosterone and control. And one of the interesting results of that paper, or it might be another paper. I read several papers. I will put the right ones in the show notes. But one of the interesting results there was that control increases testosterone output in men or women, regardless of whether they did it in a traditionally masculine way or a traditionally feminine way. So there is some kind of control competition aspect to testosterone and the related effects.
How do they define control in this study?
I can't remember off the top of my head. It's in the paper, which is freely available to download. So we will put that in there for people can make their own mind up about that. But it is an interesting result, and it seemed, at least at first glance, to be relatively well done as a paper. Psychology stuff is a bit harder, a bit more wishy-washy than the hard sciences I'm used to, so I can't always draw a direct comparison.
Because a common comparison in the way that young men and young women are socialised is often competition, is that men are often perceived, at least in the West, to be encouraged to achieve, to go out and to compete and to be better than the people around them.
Oh, in ways that women are discouraged from?
Yeah.
Yeah, and women are... And of course, exceptions to every rule, but this is what the majority of reading on the subject suggests, is that women at a young age are generally taught to retreat somewhat and to not impose themselves on others, whereas men are directly taught to impose themselves.
I was going to say, is the problem the competition, or that the problem is that the goal is to win the competition? That, like, you'll be beating yourself up if you're not winning.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying it's a problem directly. I'm saying how integral is competition to the way that the male social structure is taught and developed in the West? Do we think that becomes a fairly integral part? Because, I mean, like I said, when you get a bunch of guys together, they're often very competitive. There's often a lot of ribbing to drive people lower down a social scale to you, disguised as banter, however you want to call it. It's often designed to belittle someone in the group so that they become lower in the social hierarchy than you. However humorous or light-hearted it may be, there is often a pecking order established of sorts, even if it's not explicitly acknowledged.
I think there is some truth to that, but I think it's often when it's... that social hierarchies and things happen, I believe, naturally in humanity, whatever you do. I don't think it's something we get away from. We're social creatures. There's a kind of... we're always trying to work out where we are, and I don't think that's something we'd ever get rid of culturally, even if we tried. I may be wrong. There may be some culture where everyone is 100% equal, but I think it's just one of those things we have to deal with. When that is mixed with being in a hyper-competitive culture, I think it often works out badly. I mean, there is many examples. You've already brought up the army and sport, but also you get it in, like, the bankers. You know, you have to win, you have to make a stupid amount of money, and that's the only way your personal worth is judged in that group. And I think that's probably the problem. It's when you tie someone's personal worth like that.
I mean, as a society, we encourage people to achieve above and beyond that as well. So we're encouraged to achieve, but we're never encouraged to achieve until we have enough. We're always encouraged to achieve more.
Yes, I think that's the issue there, yeah.
And I think men in particular. I mean, Mark, how much of this crosses over into the gay community in your eyes in Britain? How much competition is there, and is it generally the same kind of competition that you get with straight men in your experience?
I mean, for me, the big thing that the straight community straight men don't have, that gay men do, is there are gender roles within
anal sex.
Well, apart from that, but no, if you're lucky, you can find the right girl. Moving on, there's the gender roles within being gay men, because there's the top and the bottom thing, isn't there? And one is seen as more masculine than the other.
Yeah, and I didn't know that was a thing. I did not know that was a thing until a couple of years ago, and I had a gay colleague, and I made an offhand joke. I can't remember what it was, but he got horribly offended at the situation at the insinuation that he was a bottom.
Oh yeah. He
was like, "No, I'm a top, thank you very much." I'd always kind of assumed it was a bit of a give and take.
Lol.
But it's not, is it?
Well, it can be. You do get guys who are genuinely verse, but it's very rare that someone's 100%, completely 50-50. And it's also very rare that you get someone that's completely 100%, I think. But most gay men in their head will have a figure of what percentage top they are, what percentage bottom they are. It is seen as the term Arthur and Martha becomes a derogatory term. Arthur is a positive,
okay,
and Martha is a negative within the gay community.
So those who receive are seen as somewhat lesser in the pecking order.
They're seen as feminine
because they're somewhat less masculine. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're seen as the woman in the relationship, which is wrongly assumed as the bad thing, the weak thing, the
thing you don't want to be.
Yes, to be honest with you, I've done it both ways, and it's pleasant both ways, thank you very much. I happen to be more top these days, but in my 20s I was quite bottom. And you do get kind of, there's definitely a thing where tops are seen as more butch. For example, if you're a very effeminate gay man, and you say you're
And if any of
top,
you had met Mark, butch is not a word we would normally use, is it, Mark?
Thanks, man. If you use if you are an exceptionally effeminate man, and someone finds out you're top, they express surprise. And I'm like, well, that's bullshit. Where I like to put my willy got to do with the fact that I've got an odd walk.
Sorry, I think there's a thing here where humans have a set of kind of built-in heuristics where we're trying to judge. It's why we judge people by their cover. And you repeatedly say, oh, you shouldn't do that. And why first impressions are important. We try and judge people based on physical cues they give us. And people aren't good at separating out different parts of people's personalities that don't necessarily... Because if they're given a stereotype, this is the way it is, then they will go, oh, well, that person over there, they're effeminate, must be a bottom in that example we just used, and so on and so forth. That people need to have those preconceptions challenged to appreciate that all these different parts of people's psyches are separate and not necessarily intertwined, just because they have been in the stereotypes that we've seen.
Yeah.
So to sort of expand on that, like what Mark was saying, it appears that you have gender roles even when there is no biological sex involved.
I would agree with that.
Really hard to phrase that when we're talking about sex as an activity instead of as a biological trait.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Because that's what gender used to mean to a lot of people, and now gender is perceived as a social construct while sex is seen as a biological difference.
Doesn't it go to the point that the big masculine thing is penetration? If you penetrate, you are masculine.
I think you could expand on that to say it's once again, it's the toxic side of strength.
Yeah.
It's that the person utilising their strength to be dominant in a given situation is perceived as masculine, and that's perhaps the toxic side of it, is that I think being the dominant in any given situation is seen as a masculine thing for good or for ill, which is why, girls get called bossy and guys get called a leader. And why I think it's this whole idea of the alpha, which I don't think necessarily has any biological place in the human structure. I don't think humans really have alphas so much, but...
Well, that's famously a misunderstanding of how wolves work anyway.
yeah, massively misunderstanding of how wolves work. And then the red pill community is taken on as some sort of twisted ideal. It is also a real hint at the role masculinity has in relation to the role of women. The idea that, Arthur and Martha, that the lesser is the feminine, even amongst a man-man relationship. And I really wanted your thought on that as the woman in the room.
The virtual room.
Which is kind of like the elephant in the room, but prettier.
I don't know, elephants are quite cute. It seems to show that...
I love elephants. They're great. I just didn't want to compare you to an elephant. That could be seen as insulting in terms of body mass, I guess.
Yes.
Now I'm going to have to make a whole podcast apologising to people who might be overweight.
And
For clarification,
to
everyone, I am overweight.
They're quite big animals.
The elephant
They're not
apology
really
cast
very
coming
fatty.
soon.
Anyway, moving on from the elephant and coming back to the woman in the room.
It seems like relationships tend to, or the way we see relationships is having a masculine and a feminine component to them in that case, and that people are more comfortable with those two components existing in two separate people in the relationship rather than... It's just easier to segregate the ideas if you put one concept in one person.
Perhaps what you're saying is that it's better to perceive it as a gender role than as something attributed to biological sex, and to detach it from males and females and just attach it to two people in a relationship. Perhaps the reason it's been attached to males and females is because traditionally throughout history there have been a greater number of male-female relationships.
Yeah, and if you look at it on a population level, I'm sure the more masculine traits fall in the more male population, the more feminine traits fall in the more feminine population.
And I mean, it'd be interesting to see how that would tie in line with testosterone levels, etc., and hormone levels.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of research going on about that.
Yeah, and it'll be fascinating to see where it ends up.
Yeah, and where it will go in the future, soon as we're changing ideas of gender roles and what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine, how you can be both at the same time, or neither.
Moving this topic on slightly, and toxic masculinity has become a very hot topic in recent years. I mean, even not just for the damage it does to people who are perceived to not have it, or to women and to feminist movements, but to men themselves. The idea that because they must be strong, and strong means a stiff upper lip in British society, and has done since the Napoleonic Wars, that this is contributing directly to enormous male suicide rates. This fact that they can't be emotional and open up and explain the way they feel and deal with it with people and with support, because needing support is seen as weak. But moving on from that, I want to also explore the idea of, we mentioned red pill, and we've all got very clear opinions on that movement, I guess. But do we think perhaps that this inability to define masculinity in a positive way and to create a sort of positive masculinity, the fact that common masculine traits such as strength are being attacked these days so much as toxic because of the exaggerated examples of them, do we think this is perhaps what's directly causing or contributing towards the rise of men's rights activism and of red pill type movements?
I would think those are a reaction to feminism movements. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's linked to that. I think it's directly tied to the fact that historically it's undeniable, as Mark mentioned earlier without using the word privilege, men have been privileged over women in society. This is just the way it has been in the West for thousands of years. And similarly, that Caucasian people have been privileged over black people and Asian people in Western society. But there's an increasing movement to attack that and to attack people for their privilege, particularly online. This sort of, oh, well, you can't really have an opinion on feminism because you're a man. I don't think it's so much feminism as the attempt to shout down people who aren't in that camp that's directly contributing to this rise. The idea that young men are seeing, and I feel quite strongly about this, despite opposing the men's rights activist movement, I feel quite strongly that these people are being created and encouraged by a constant attack on them as men, as a group. I mean, I cannot tell you how much I despise #NotAllMen.
You despise that hashtag?
Anyone that uses that to mock or disparage somebody trying to stick up for themselves or their group, I think needs to be slapped out of the argument. I really do feel strongly about that.
Well, not all men is a lazy way of getting of talking about it. I understand your point, but saying I'm not like that is bollocks. It's, of course, you don't have to point out that you're not like that. You're much better not being like that and doing things with your actions, not your words. It just makes you look whiny. I'm not fond of #NotAllMen. I think I think that people who have to point out that, oh, I'm not like that, are so bloody paranoid that maybe deep down they are.
But do you not think that people belong to tribes? That's inherent, okay? Whether it's their music, whether it's their interests, their hobbies, their gender, people belong to groups, and they feel
their sexuality.
There are many ways that people split themselves into tribes, and I feel that when somebody attacks a group, people in that group feel personally attacked, even when it's not personally directed at them. If someone says, men do this, I don't type, well, I don't, because I remind myself that they're not talking about me. But it is my first reaction, because they're talking about a group I belong to.
Yeah, and if it's a word you personally ascribe to yourself, and you aren't aware of this tendency for people to generalise, then you are likely to go, oh, well, they said men, I'm a man, they must mean me.
Comparatively, people will say, men do this, or men need to stop doing this, or men are so sexist, or men do that. And if you don't do any of those things, it's really upsetting to see it constantly attributed to you indirectly, even if it's not directly.
And to have your argument nullified.
It does get on your nerves. If we said women need to stop doing this, or women are all like this, it would be rejected straight away.
But that's because it comes from a position of privilege.
I think a problem there is the power balance thing, because...
Yeah, and that is true, and I don't disagree with that. But I do think, if we want an equal society, surely we need to treat people equally. We can't have one rule for one and one rule for another if we want to get to a place where we don't have one rule for one and one rule for another.
Yes, that's true, but the problem is things kind of have to swing a certain amount one way to come back. I don't think we can shortcut to that perfect utopia at the end.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
But that's my point, and my point is that doing this creates a perceived off-balance in one direction in an attempt to correct a previous imbalance, and causes its own reactionary movement.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's where we get men's rights activists, who, I agree with Mark, are a bunch of whiny people who can't accept that they are in a position of privilege, but constantly feel attacked due to what they see, what they read, and what they hear. They stop feeling privileged, and they start feeling repressed or oppressed, regardless of any statistical facts.
Yes, I think also part of the issue there is that the people who, not again, this is a sweeping generalisation, not knowing many of them, but there are a lot of people who are in some way dispossessed or poor or something. And I think it's more of a problem in America than it is in the UK, but I think having seen some things recently, maybe it's a problem here as well, more than we had initially realised. That like manufacturing jobs that used to be kind of solid jobs for white men to go into are falling down, and people who are coming from those kind of backgrounds can't get what they consider a decent, potentially even masculine job. They might see it that way. And then they're dispossessed, and then they're spending more time reading these kind of alternate theories and stuff and feeling like they're being attacked. And all of that together is a big mixing pot that can lead to people wanting to have that kind of movement.
Yeah, to be told your argument or your point or your opinion on a certain topic is null and void because of some circumstances that are beyond your control must be really hard to hear, and would of course cause a reaction against that, because you want to have your voice heard regardless of whether your voice is, or whether your opinion is a common one or your voice just sort of harmonises with everyone else's, or if it is different. You don't want to be told it doesn't count what you say or what you're like. And
I think it's a fairly recent phenomenon that men are attacked for being men in this way, or at least perceived.
Is it a more recent phenomenon, or just it's more noticeable?
As has been previously pointed out, it is on the back of thousands of years of women or people of colour being attacked and repressed for being the way they are. It's not something that men, or Caucasian men in particular, have as much experience in. But I think that they're reacting to it in an extremely unhealthy way. But I do think that the reaction is caused and prompted by the way the discourse is being handled regarding
equality. I think it might just be it's the first event. Like, the hashtag is recent because hashtags are recent. This is... Of
course the hashtag is recent. I'm more speaking about the wider phenomenon.
Yeah, but is the phenomenon not tied into that? It feels like a really big phenomena. It's like it couldn't have happened before because people didn't talk on such a scale and see problems outside of their town, outside of their village, outside of their country.
Yeah. I think the internet really opens up the whole debate.
Yeah, and it's going to be really strange, or really interesting to see how it goes in the future, really strange to live through it now, to see sort of an argument one way or the other, people pushing back at each other until we finally realise what is a healthy way to have this discussion, so we can look back and say, oh, that would have been different. It would have been better if we did it differently.
The vast majority of people on the other side of the argument who are fighting for equality are in no way seeking to belittle or take from men or masculinity. They're just seeking to raise themselves to the same level. But it's always a vocal minority in either camp. The men's rights, like, whenever we get a female lead in a film, and there's always, oh, look at all these people who are dead upset. If you look into the stories, it's usually 5 people on Twitter who've expressed something very strongly, and then it's been reported repeatedly and circulated
because it makes a massively good story.
And there are more people attacking those people than there are attacking the point, because the majority of people don't think that way.
Well, that's a classic, though, isn't it? That you get more people turn up to protest about the BNP than there are BNP supporters at Pride events. But that's brilliant.
Or the Satanic Panic.
It's brilliant. If you've got more people calling Nazi scumbags.
I think my point is that in the digital media age, we directly blow it out of proportion. So we circulate it, and the media spins it as if it's way more people than it is, because it generates controversy, and then it generates clicks, and then it generates revenue. And I think media companies directly exploit all of these things in order to make money, and they stir up controversy and anger between the two groups to create click revenue. I really do see that.
Yeah,
a lot.
definitely. I feel that's the way the media has handled things for as long as it's been around.
We're going to have to come back into a social media podcast at some point, because I think we could easily derail this discussion.
Yep. Once again, we'll add it to the list. I've got a little game we can play, guys. I have a little game, okay? We're going to take turns. We're going to go me, Mike, Aisha, Tom. Okay? We're going to name someone, preferably a man. The rest of us will say whether we think that person is what we would perceive as masculine or not. Okay? So I'm going to start with Vladimir Putin.
So I was thinking about this because it's in the show notes, and I think there are definitely aspects to what he does that could be seen as masculine. Wait, let's rephrase that. There are definitely...
Riding bare-chested through a forest with a rifle and sailing away in a submarine like a Bond
like
villain.
He is a Bond villain.
Is manly, like, in a way that...
He is a Bond villain, that's true. Putin, hold on a sec, we need to put this disclaimer in there. Vladimir Putin and the KGB, if you are listening to this, we have nothing but the utmost respect for your regime. Please do not poison or otherwise harm us.
Polonium is a horrible way to go. Yeah, I think like, shirtless riding around on a horse, if that's your thing, and you happen to do a nice photo shoot of it, feel free to look manly, but I think there's because it's also tied in with the intimidation stuff and things like that, that's where it starts to become a bad thing.
But would it be as manly, right, if he was more overweight or more sagging or spindly?
Is it Putin, the way he is perceived by some people, it's surely beyond masculine, it's sort of almost like godlike, right?
There is a god complex.
He could look...
I don't know if people perceive him as godlike. I do think he is... I think I would class him as masculine in both the positive and negative senses of the word. Mark, what do you think about Putin?
I think he's toxic masculinity.
Ooh, good use of the word. Phrase. This new phrase.
Just the fact that he is idolised for being just the worst things that people associate with masculine. He doesn't... You can be a father figure by being caring. There's nothing like that there. He is just a shitbag.
Yeah, just all of the exaggerative examples of masculinity turned outwards. Strength. He is strong, but he's using that strong to attack elsewhere. Mark, do you want to take your turn? You can pick an individual. They can be as masculine or non-masculine as you like, and we will say whether we think they're masculine or not.
Stephen Hawking.
That's a really good one.
That's a good one.
Ooh, good choice. Aisha, what do you think of Stephen Hawking? Is he masculine? Is he something you normally associate with masculine?
That's a really hard question. I think it's a really good example. Like,
isn't
obviously, he's male, but I think his achievements go outside of what you think of, like, oh, that's a manly thing to do, or that's a really feminine thing to do. It's I feel like I would insult him, though, by saying, oh, he's not a very masculine person. He's just really smart. That's not masculine. I don't know how to answer that.
So once again, we're associating masculine with positive.
He's like not the lumberjack dude I was thinking about when you asked me to define masculinity, but like...
I like to think that's how I look in flannel. It probably isn't.
Need the beard first. I mean, following on from that point, I think it is an interesting thing to talk about. Speaking as a physicist, obviously... I appreciate everything he's done from a scientific context, and I appreciate the things that excited me about his work and helped get me into physics. So his work has directly had a beneficial effect on my life. But by the way I was kind of brought up to understand what masculinity was, I would not have probably described him as such in the past. But I think the fact that he has continued to produce excellent scientific work while struggling with his condition, and that is the kind of good strength that I think we were talking about. That is the kind of thing. It's like he has persevered,
and I would
in the
agree
face
with
of
that
adversity
completely.
and achieved. And I think that doesn't have to be a male trait either. But I think if we're talking about positive masculine things, that's a thing where you can be like, well, that's masculine, that's good, in a good way.
So he's like a role model outside of masculinity?
Yeah, I think he's probably transcended it.
Yeah.
He's transcended to another level by his intelligence.
Above it.
So I would say, yeah, he's physically speaking, he's not what you would associate with masculinity, in that he's spindly, he's not muscular, and there's a very good reason he's not muscular. But I would say in terms of his behaviour, some of the things we discussed about being masculine are strength in the face of adversity, which, is a strong woman as well, and perhaps in that sense it's also a feminine trait. Maybe it's just a trait of an admirable person, and to a man that is perceived as masculine, and to a woman it's perceived as feminine. Who knows? It's very hard to pinpoint.
That's the exact reason why I picked Stephen Hawking, because I admire him.
Yeah.
And it's nothing to
He's
do with being a man.
He's a brilliant example.
It's nothing to do with being a man. I think he's brilliant, and I would love to be as intelligent as he is, but I'm not. And he's an exceptional person. It's nothing to do with the fact that he's a bloke. If that brain was in a body that had tits, he would be just as admirable in my eyes. And this is what I've been getting at from the very beginning.
Would he be taken as seriously by society?
But this is what I've been getting at from the very beginning, is I really find the whole masculine-feminine thing a little bit bollocks. I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to swear on this podcast, but I feel that by being so... But by such brevity, I make my point a little bit better. I didn't want to pick someone that I thought was, society's image of masculinity. I wanted to pick a person that I admire. I could have easily have said a woman, but you asked me for a man.
No, and you know what? It's a fantastic example for all those reasons. I think you've done a really, really good job there. And I think as we got to, by discussing it more, we realised that some of these traits we're associating as positive masculine traits are just simply positive traits.
Bang on.
Not necessarily inherently masculine ones. They're only masculine when applied in a masculine way to a person who is maybe aesthetically masculine.
I think that point is possibly having one of the nice things about doing podcasts like this is talking about, we've solved it, guys, is that idea that it is positive traits viewed from a male or female angle then get extrapolated out to masculinity and femininity. And I think that's quite an important thing to think about. I've not had enough time to think about it. It's just come up on the podcast, but I think that's an interesting takeaway.
Aisha, your turn.
Bill Gates.
I think that's on a similar kind of axis. Similar axis.
Similar, yes, but not completely the same. Because my initial reaction to Stephen Hawking was, interesting. And then I thought about it and came to yes. Whereas my initial reaction to Bill Gates was no.
Bill Gates definitely, especially, I'm sure we'll find some great photos to put in the show notes. There are some old photos of Bill Gates where he is the perfect definition of the kind of nerdy stereotype, the wimpy nerdy stereotype that people consider very unmasculine as a thing. And he hasn't had the facing adversity. I mean, he's had the kind of I'm a nerd and I'm facing adversity side of things, but, he's had a lot of money for a long time.
Not to the extent of Stephen Hawking, who, whether he's an admirable person in his work, yes, or an admirable person in his personal life, that's up to you. But my gut reaction to Bill Gates was easier, which was no. Then I have to sit and think about why.
Yeah, I think that speaks to our social perception of things and the stereotypes we've built up.
Yeah.
Though there is a really cool video of him doing a backflip somewhere. I assume it was a stunt double, but I've got to find that picture, that video. And
is
put
it
in
just
the notes.
captioned?
Mark, thoughts on Bill Gates? Masculine or not? Would he be a top or a bottom?
Important questions.
I don't care. I don't find him attractive. Do I think Bill Gates is...
Tom, that was not a masculine laugh.
do I think Bill Gates is masculine? In a way, the competitiveness of the business world, the stock market, and if you've read American Psycho, having the best business card and being the big dog, he's the biggest dog in the world. With that amount of money and that amount of control over... I mean, we're on his devices now. Everyone has owns something that has directly been touched by Bill Gates. He is the biggest dog in the world. He has got the best business card with the flock and the embossment and the gold trim on the edge.
Yeah, he's winning the competition.
He has won.
He's won.
That's if we're going back to we were talking about competition. He's won. He is the big dog, even though he looks like a big nerd.
Would you say that nerdiness is an inherently unmasculine trait? Is it a feminine trait? Or is it just not masculine? Or not ideal masculine?
I don't think it's feminine. There's the stereotype of the one nerd girl in the room, isn't there? So I don't think it's feminine.
But then there's sexy librarians.
I think the stereotype of the one nerd girl in the room is awkward as fuck. I mean, the number of nerd social groups I've been in where there's been one nerd girl and these guys have had such little interaction with women that they then fawn over her. And that this one girl can often... There's a stereotype that arises because of the situation. And there are exceptions to all this, and by no means are all nerd girls like this.
Not
it's
all
the
nerd girls.
minimal of them. But so
Hashtag not all nerd girls.
it only ever happens when there's one. If there's only one nerd girl in a group, it can very often either she's made uncomfortable by this behaviour and will often leave, or they play on it. So I don't even know why I'm getting sidetracked by this. It's just my personal experiences that I've
Good
seen so
therapy
much.
time for you. Yeah, that's interesting.
But I think it goes back to the ideas of there is no one who is as academically sound as Stephen Hawkins that is then built like Hulk Hogan and successful at business. There is no one who is as capable in business as Bill Gates that is built like Hulk Hogan. You see what I mean? There isn't a true definition of masculinity.
Okay, but in terms of, say, just comparing business people, what if we were to compare, say, Bill Gates to Elon Musk? Because for the same reasons that you're saying, I would say Elon Musk immediately comes across as masculine, whereas Bill Gates doesn't, despite being the top dog in the competition, as we've established has been linked to masculinity.
Is that because Elon Musk is politically outspoken and, like, he liaises with world powers, he's consults for them? Does that make him seem more masculine?
I think some of it might be presence, and again, it's a negative word, but domination in a sense, if that makes sense, because Elon Musk dominates a room without speaking.
Never been in a room with him.
He has a gravitas. Sorry, what?
I said I've never been in a room with him. I wouldn't know.
Yeah, but I mean, even when you see him, there's a sort of gravitas. I don't know if he's given this respect for a reason or if it's... But whenever you see him interacting with people, it's a vastly different experience. And it might just be down to a certain level of charisma and social control.
That's a good
Not his dump
trait.
stat.
No.
Definitely. And I mean, there's a huge difference between those two people, even if we're comparing that they're both successful in the same way.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tom, it is your turn to pick someone.
Well, I have had a choice in my head for some time, and I think...
Is it Lindy Beige?
It's not Lindy Beige, though we can... I do like that man. I think my choice will have to be Ron Swanson. Fictional though he may be.
Has anyone in this podcast not seen any of Parks and
that's
Recreation?
me. I thought you were talking about the other one.
No, never.
Oh.
No.
None. Okay.
Sorry.
Mark, we're going to give you a couple of clips. I'm going to find some Ron Swanson clips on YouTube.
Yeah, I have shown Aisha some things related to Ron Swanson.
I've seen enough caption pictures on Reddit or Tumblr or something to get an idea of where you're coming from.
So this link to YouTube will go in the show notes as well. We're going to obviously cut out the bit where people are watching it and simply get their reaction to it.
All right, I'll watch it.
Okay, I totally get why you picked this guy then.
Okay, so on the subject of Ron Swanson, there's an important distinction to make here. Ron Swanson is not a real person.
And that's a right shame for the world.
So that does place him in a different category from Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking, and Vladimir Putin.
That's true, but I think it's worth kind of bringing up... It's a positive media portrayal of masculinity.
No, it is. It's very, very worth bringing up, and for reasons we will discuss. But first, Mark and Aisha hadn't seen Ron Swanson before. So starting with Mark, what is your opinion of Ron Swanson and whether he is masculine?
He's a stereotype. Of course he's a stereotype. He's in a sitcom.
Aisha, what are your thoughts on Ron Swanson?
Yeah, this guy is, like, old-fashioned masculinity, like quiet, hilarious, not necessarily particularly smart, very respectful, like doesn't use too many words if he doesn't need to.
But exaggerated for
comedic effect. I'm sure if you knew this person, you'd find them extremely irritating. Because, yeah, they're a stereotype. They're not real, but he's obviously, as a character, very funny. Probably because a lot of people can relate to that or know someone like that in certain ways.
Yeah. So I think that it's a really good example because it is what happens when, as Mark says, you take all the stereotype traits and you take away everything else. Yeah. He's a character that has the stiff upper lip. He's reserved. He's generally perceived as strong and in control, hilariously except when there are strong women involved, at which point he becomes a child and he's completely controlled.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which, again, is an interesting comedic commentary.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Well, you know the clip at the start when he talks about Tammy and his wife and smelling the sulphur?
His ex-wife, yeah.
Yeah.
He's had 3 wives all called Tammy, which was also his mother's name.
Right, that's a slightly uncomfortable fact.
And they've all exaggerated some sort of strong control over him.
Nice. How Freudian.
Yeah, I think one thing, both Mark and Aisha haven't seen the full series, and yes, he is a stereotype done for comedic effect. But I think the point is, overall, while he may have some of those negative qualities, he is generally he's always trying to do the right thing. And his idea of the right thing is what most people would agree is the right thing, I think, is important. And the way he does treat people with respect and stuff, like, not everything about him is necessarily great.
He treats people the way he would like to be treated, which is that he doesn't want to know about your personal problems of life, but he also doesn't want you to know about his.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is one of the
there are some
potentially damaging traits of masculinity, but is something that's perceived as masculine.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, he's not the role model to live your life by, but it's a well-written and interesting character that explores that in some way.
He's masculine enough that I think a lot of guys will jokingly refer to him as a paragon of masculinity. They're like, oh, yep, no. Be like Ron Swanson, he's a real man.
Yes, I think
and they do it as a joke. Yeah. They do it as a joke, but there's enough of a truth to it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's kind of like, if you dial back Ron Swanson, if you turn it down to 7 instead of an 11, and you make it more mediated, more controlled, less extreme, he exhibits a lot of what are potentially seen as somewhat positive traits in a lot of contexts.
He's like America's dad.
It's just exaggerated to the it's exaggerated to the point where it's stupid.
Yeah. He certainly doesn't seem toxic, though.
He's the logical extreme of masculinity, or of positive masculinity.
Yeah.
Because he's very rarely a negative character on the show. In fact, almost never, as Tom says. He's constantly trying to look after everyone in the show, but he's always trying to make sure that no one thinks he's doing it or that no one knows he's doing it. Because he doesn't want any of the credit or the glory or the affection. He just wants to get on with it. And I think these are all what are seen as positive masculine traits, but in Ron Swanson, they're exaggerated to the point of silliness.
Yes, yeah.
What seems to be good about masculinity, or the things that people, or that you guys are enjoying about masculine people, is that they make good role models. Because, I don't know, you're guys, and they're guys to look up to. And the masculine traits you see, obviously, are the ones that you want to be in yourself. So you see, like,
it's
masculine as aspiring to. Yeah, it's a role model that you want to be. Would you say that?
Would you say it's the best of what we think men can be?
That's a really neat way of putting what I just tried to say, yeah.
But my definition of what the best a man can be is very different to the traditional what the best a man can be.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear it.
I personally value compassion and maybe stereotypically feminine traits as admirable. But I don't think that makes me unmanly.
Yeah, I think most people would agree with you. I think that in recent years especially, say the last 10 to 15, more than others, it's become increasingly accepted as the norm and increasingly accepted as the ideal, is that men should have these positive masculine traits, but not only these positive masculine traits. And I think this is where we're getting gender crossover. I think that more men are being seen to be, well, you do need to have these masculine traits, but you also need to have these feminine traits. And I think that's also happening in reverse. I think, it's becoming more accepted that women can be strong and dominant as well as caring and compassionate. I think that these lines are being increasingly blurred, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good thing as well. It seems like it makes sense if them having them too polarized polarized as a bad thing. It becomes toxic, and especially realizing that within a person you can express many traits.
Okay, I want to ask Aisha one quick thing before
she
goes, because it is one of the topics on the list. Male body image. I'm sure that us three men are going to have a lot to say about this, but what are your perceptions of male body image and male self-image?
Well, if you want to go with that ideal, that one. So I guess this is like extreme masculine body image is probably as unattainable as extreme feminine body image, and I can imagine it's just as damaging to the young men that look at extremely masculinized men as the young women or young people that look at extreme feminized bodies.
Yeah, compare Chris Pratt in Parks and Recreation to Chris Pratt in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, and sorry, I just dropped my train of thought there. I'll find it in a second. The body positive movement among men seems to be just as strong, maybe not as big, but as the body positive trait that's among women as well. And I think that's just really important.
Because, I mean, for decades, we've discussed female body image in media and unrealistic standards. But only recently have people started discussing that in relation to men, I think.
Yeah.
You know, we've had a lot of talk about Barbie for decades, but how much talk has there been of He-Man? It's a recent thing to even start discussing it, that men should be anything other than a physical Adonis.
Yeah, and I think there's that link you had in the show notes of magazine covers on Twitter, which is eye-opening just to look at, like the difference between like Vogue and GQ. But you have, like, on the front of GQ, you have Kit Harington, of course, Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, kind of, he's got longer hair than you might associate with that traditional kind of lumberjack image, but he's got a beard, and he's kind of in a manly character, although if you watch the show, he's one of those characters who has more nuance than just being manly or anything like that.
Yeah, but if you see any of his men's health covers, the dude is jacked. The dude has massive arms and shoulders.
Just like the way the GQ is done, I think it's partly because they're men, and so they're less like, they're not just naked on the front cover of the GQ.
A jacket on as well as clothes.
Yeah, there's like, it's a really nice photo of just John Boyega's face, just, you know, looking at you in kind of a like...
sultry way.
It's a bit sultry, yeah. I'd say it's sultry. But, you know, it's it's a bit of a different way of doing it, and I think that there is a kind of...
It's just his face, not his whole body as well.
Yeah, and yeah. The fact is his face, and also kind of the way the fashion is done is a bit different. And that's probably, in general, gone more...
It's alright, have you seen the Idris Elba one?
I haven't seen the Idris Elba one.
Scroll down to Idris Elba. Essence magazine, July 11th. Ooh. I hope you like a little bit of cleavage.
July 11th, I'm almost there. Kit Harington again. Oh wow, yeah. But that's good, a good photo because he's a bit older now, and they're like, look, there he is with his grey beard, and well, not entirely grey, but you know, I think there's more of a kind of people have been dealing better with having older people in like art and stuff recently. I mean, I know we're going to do an episode on Wonder Woman at some point, but for example, they had actual older women with wrinkles in that movie, which is a thing that doesn't always happen. It's a tasteful kind of, but revealing. It's an interesting shot. We'll put that in the show notes as well.
But I do think that men do have a reinforced impossible beauty standard the same as women.
But that's universal though, isn't it? Because the images in magazines are airbrushed.
Yep.
I look at, I mean, I can't remember what it was, but I saw like a documentary where someone showed the difference between the original photo and the airbrush photo.
You wouldn't recognise it. Yeah.
They might as well be painting.
It's huge. And for me, I would like to look better, but I don't want to do exercise.
Oh, well, you're not tubby at all, Mark.
I'm getting there. You know when a skinny person, well, a skinny bloke usually, puts on a little bit of weight and they end up looking like a ball on a string? I'm well on my way. You know what I mean?
Skinny men specifically, women tend to put that weight on elsewhere as more of a spread, whereas men's weight tends to be centralised in the stomach, yeah.
A bloke with a bigger frame than me puts on weight. It's evenly distributed. A skinny guy really does look like a ball on a string. It's not dignified.
You'd be surprised how much less dignified it is to be, 6'1", have my shoulders and still be 18 stone, Mark. There's still a lot of self-consciousness regarding chest area, It's not seen as attractive to have any sort of moob. There's still, any sort of sagging. You'd be amazed at how self-conscious it can be and how much someone might envy your body shape as much as you envy theirs.
I mean, I'll put some photos in the show notes to this, or maybe just a link to a blog post I did on it. But I went through a depression is probably, it wasn't clinical depression, but I was depressed and sad about my looks when I finished my undergrad. And I basically put in a lot of work because I was like, I'm never going to get laid looking like this. And then in the end, I ended up, I lost a lot of weight. And then I went and did a Thor cosplay where I went to the effort of going to the gym for 6 months. And I don't think I could do that.
And
now.
that is a fantastic photo, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good photo.
Your Thor photo is brilliant.
And in fact, like...
You're a bit short, but...
yeah. But, it was a lot of effort and it was good. But, like, I don't feel like I can keep that up all the time. That's just... I think that's a big part of it. All these people who are in photo shoots and stuff, models, they can spend 6 hours a day going to the gym if they need to. Whatever it is their crazy
because it's their job to be in that state. They're paid
to be
to
healthy.
look like that.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that's one of the problems we have today is as food and stuff has become easier to get, if you have the wrong type of body, the one that puts on weight easier may have helped you survive in the Arctic in many years ago, but nowadays is a bit of a negative and you have to go and make yourself do stuff.
However, I want to segue now because Tom has provided me with a perfect segue.
Fair enough.
He mentioned changing his body image and relating to his body image in terms of getting laid. How important is sex to the masculine identity?
Well, I'd say it's generally considered quite important. Like, in the stereotypical way.
I would say it's enormously important. Yeah, I would say it's enormously important. The amount of... I mean, what's the common term when two guys are trying to grandstand against each other? It's a dick measuring contest. Everything is related to sex when it comes to competition between men.
I'll be brutally honest here. I've had sex with a lot of people. And when I reveal the number of people, they're all blokes. When I've revealed the number of blokes that I've had sex with...
Are they all blokes or just mostly blokes?
One girl. When I reveal the number, people are genuinely shocked. And it does, despite my desire not to be like that, it does make me feel like a big man. Because people look at you in a, holy shit, that's an achievement. You've fucked that many people?
Promiscuity is a positive trait. It's a manly trait.
I just really want to know the number now. I'm not going to lie.
On a scale of 1 to Barney Stinson.
1 to Barney Stinson, probably... Well, 1 to Barney Stinson.
On a scale of 1 to Mick Hucknall. Or 1 to Gene Simmons.
I've lost count.
You've lost count. Well, there's a start, right? What number are you at when you lost count, if you don't mind sharing?
Oh, I was well into triple figures.
This sounds like a dick measuring contest.
Triple figures.
Wow.
And what is our reaction to that? Okay, so mine is stereotypical. That is kind of impressive. Tom, what was your reaction to that?
Mine was wow, because I'm just impressed impressed in the kind of like, I'm not sure how you've had the time.
Well, I am nearly 40.
Oh, I was not aware. You were a bit.
You know, I've got 10 years on you for the amount of time I've been able to spend having sex.
Episode 3, also known as the one wherein Mark brags.
No, but that's the thing.
No,
it is a brag. Yeah. It is absolutely.
But that's my point. Is that it's so tied into our identity as men. And I mean, how much of this is nurture? How much of it is nature? How much are we just programmed to try and breed? I suppose that goes out the window in your case, maybe, Mark. You're not going to be producing any offspring with the sex you have.
No, you don't get bum babies.
What is
Glorious.
Shall I get piles of them?
Nice.
I was waiting for that pun to sink in.
To sink in?
It's tied into the male identity beyond the biological need to procreate. I think it might stem from the biological need to procreate, but it's become ingrained beyond that to a point where it's inherent in situations where there's no such thing as children being procreated, to men that are having safe sex, to gay men that are having sex with protection or not. You know, there's no risk of a child.
I always use protection, just to make that clear.
And we advocate that. We advocate that all of our listeners do the same. Back onto the topic and a less serious note. Yeah, so I think it is very tied into the male identity. I think it didn't take us long to reach that conclusion between us, did it? We all saw it as a positive thing for Mark, if not a positive thing inherently.
And the other guys.
Well, I've got no comment on that, Mark, because I couldn't possibly know how satisfied they were at the end of it.
Oh, they were satisfied.
Is Nathan around? We could get a second.
You mean my long-term partner?
We could get a second opinion.
Well, he's stuck around. I assume that's a good enough second opinion in most cases.
If Jensen Blake wants a little bit of extra publicity, you know.
You know how you're not supposed to swear on this podcast. Don't get Nathan. If you ask him that question, you'll get nothing but obscenity.
But he is more traditionally masculine than you. I mean, he has admirable arm strength.
He does. He's a wrestler, so he looks better than I do because he's bothered to work on his body.
Oh my! So,
Judge Decay.
Yeah, I mean that was a brilliant segue. The last 2 points are we've got historical masculinity and then masculinity and. So to move on to historical masculinity very quickly, and this ties into body shape. How have we seen it change? At the risk of upsetting you, Mark, you are the oldest person in the room. How have you seen the concept of masculinity change in your 3 decades on the planet?
5 decades on the planet.
5 decades? You've not been around. You're not 50. Fuck off.
I was born in 1978.
How old are you again?
5 decades. I'm 38, 39 next month.
That's still not 5 decades.
I always think you're about 30. I always think you're about 34,
I've
Mark.
been
You're
in
so full of
5
life.
decades.
So in 5 decades of life, some of which
5
you
different
probably
decades,
won't
okay, I'll accept that.
remember. Yeah, 5.
Sorry, I didn't get the point you were trying to make.
How have you seen masculinity in the media change?
I don't really remember 80s masculinity, but I remember what I perceived as masculinity in the 80s, and it was basically my dad. He was a sportsman. He was good at all the sports. He was active, and he was intelligent at the same time. And you know your perfect image of your dad. Well, I guess that's where my original, before I took some time to actually formulate an opinion that wasn't given to me, that's where it came from. I mean, my dad is less so these days because he's 70, so he's not as strong. But
Is he British Ron Swanson?
Perhaps not. Perhaps.
Someone's got to build the closet you come out of. So
he fucking locked it.
So I mean, for me, I wasn't around in the 80s, but if you just look at 80s films compared to 90s films, there's a really stark difference.
Look at Tom Selleck's moustache in the 80s.
So in the 80s, right, you have a lot of this stereotypical, very broad shoulders and chests, big arms, in all sorts of roles, from romantic leads to action leads. And in the 90s, this started to make way for a more, the metrosexual idea came around in the 90s, didn't it? And it started being replaced with, more David Beckham, less David Hasselhoff.
But could Beckham hassle the Hoff? I don't think he could.
I think Beckham probably could hassle the Hoff, yeah. I think I don't think he'd have too much trouble. But I mean, it just shows you how the body shape changes and the behaviour changes from decade to decade. And it shows you that masculinity, whilst it might have some constants in terms of strength and resilience, it changes drastically from generation to generation, and I think that ties into the points Aisha was making about it generally being what you aspire to be as a man, and the way that the generation before you influenced that.
If you're talking about body shape, right? Yeah. One constant that has always been, sometimes, let's go with 4 guys as body shapes. Do you all know who Jeff Capes is?
No.
No, but I've got Google.
Yes, to Google.
Jeff Capes was Magnus ver Magnusson, a world's strongest man contender.
Yeah, I know Magnus Magnusson.
So Magnus ver Magnusson. So I'm going to give you 4 celebrities: Magnus ver Magnusson, Hulk Hogan, Magnus ver Magnusson, Hulk Hogan, Seth Green, and David Beckham. You've got 4 different body types there, and everybody would argue.
But Seth Green was a werewolf.
But Seth Green's also 5'4" and about 7 stone, built like a pencil. So what I'm getting at is, you look at Seth Green,
yep.
He would always be physically at the bottom of the pile.
Yes.
Skinny is not masculine.
Unless you're into cute little funny ginger guys,
Well, Seth Green borders on my perfect man. I don't know what that says about me.
But you're a top.
But the other 3, right? You ask anyone, they would probably put them in a different order of who was the most butch. But Seth Green would always come at the bottom.
Yeah, for example, I would put Magnus Samuelsson above Hulk Hogan, honestly.
But not everyone would, because fat isn't attractive to some people.
No, because Hulk Hogan is a caricature.
People who are involved in wrestling maybe have to speak to this better than I am, but I think there's a perception with Hulk Hogan that some of what he was doing was like, it's more of an act than it is him, really. Obviously, his physical shape.
Magnus Samuelsson was just the world's strongest man multiple times. He was just a...
Yeah, he doesn't need to... You don't need to prove that you are.
I wasn't specifically saying the people.
I don't know, I get that.
If you didn't know who they were, but you looked at their bodies, you were ignoring the fact that Hulk Hogan was a character that he played. If you looked at the bodies of Terry Bollea, if you want.
If you
look at the bodies of these people.
Today I learned.
Have you not seen the Hulk Hogan documentary? This is interesting, actually. Hulk Hogan documentary. It was about the pornography that was the kind of home video of the pornography with him in.
God, that is not something I would want to watch.
But he didn't like it because, and I quote, Terry Bollea has a 6-inch penis. Hulk Hogan has a 9-inch penis.
Is that a fact? Was that an announcement? Was that a press release? Or?
No, it wasn't. But what I'm getting at is the uber image of Hulk Hogan was a stereotype
match up with the
that Terry Bollea said in court that even he couldn't match.
Yes.
You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Just extrapolating from Hulk Hogan, Magnus Samuelsson, I would say one of the differences, and one of my instinctive reactions, and I don't know why this is, would be that the whole waxed, oiled wrestler thing comes across as somewhat less masculine than someone of equivalent size and bulk and hairiness. I don't know. Maybe that's a testosterone thing, a visible indicator of testosterone. I don't know.
I think that might be changing tastes as well, because the older pictures of Arnold Schwarzenegger when he's all oiled up and in a silly kind of golden pair of pants is not the same as how you imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger post that. Even though he's often maybe oiled up in his movies, it's in a different way. I think there's a kind of difference
oil
in the image.
generally makes someone come across as less masculine.
Possibly a difference between oil and sweat, actually.
Well, no, it depends what kind of oil as well. So motor oil.
Yes.
Generally manly.
Oh, well, sliced alone.
Yeah.
But oiled up and posed seems...
Because it implies someone's been fixing something. It's amazing to see how it changes throughout time. So our last topic is just a very quick run through some masculinity and how we think some things relate. And the first one's the most controversial, masculinity in women. How does our masculinity, or perception of masculinity, affect our relationship with women? That's probably a whole podcast in and of itself. But does anyone have any quick thoughts on it?
Seems that you're...
For me, it doesn't. It doesn't. Women are friends. I'm never sexually attracted to women. So for me, that's actually an irrelevant question.
Aisha?
It seemed when you were talking about it earlier, there were definitely some feelings of your masculinity and your confidence around women and how that worked for or against you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it completely does. Tom?
There is a thing there. Like, for me personally, I'm very attracted to confident women, but confident women are not necessarily masculine because we happen to assign confidence and an outgoingness often to being quite masculine. I don't think there's a necessary link for me personally, but I can see in society around me that people seem to think there is a necessity to be, muscly and masculine to prove yourself to women, whereas I've always thought it's more about how you get on with someone when you talk to them.
But you definitely said that one of your motivators for Thor was sex.
Well, yeah, I was 18, depressed, and didn't think I could get with women. That was my misconception. I have since found out there were people who were attracted to me at the time, despite of my size. I didn't realise. I honestly didn't realise. One person almost told me that they liked, pretty much spelled it out for me, and I didn't realise because I just had this idea in my head that I'm not masculine enough, therefore I can't get laid, and that was a bad thing.
And speaking about confidence in women, I mean, I had a very different interaction once when I was at a bar with a female friend, and I was single at the time, and she said to me, perhaps if you want to be more attractive to women, you should be less arrogant. Or come across less arrogant, to which my response was, yes, but are you attracted to me? And her response was yes, which sort of fed my point more than hers, but it shows that confidence is generally seen as attractive on both ends of the scale. I'm also generally attracted to confident women. I think people who have confidence in themselves come across as attractive, but there is that line between confidence and arrogance. Masculinity and mental health. We've touched briefly on the fact that the leading cause of death in men under 40 is suicide. That's a horrendous statistic. That is absolutely terrifying. That all three of the men in this room, in this chat, are more likely to kill themselves than die from any other way.
I mean, I'm going for immortality, but,
Transhumanism is on the list. Who knows?
So I think maybe stretching this even further, there is a general stereotype of men being less likely to seek out any health aid.
And that's the negative side of strength, isn't it?
Oh, I don't need to go to the doctor, it's just fine, it'll heal itself, and then their arm falls off kind of thing springs to mind. I mean, there's a difference between you're stuck out in the wilderness and you have to make yourself a tourniquet to, I keep having this pain in my side. Oh, it'll probably go away and actually you should go get yourself checked out because that might be important.
Yeah, because it's seen in society and in the West that men should be strong and resilient and not need help. They shouldn't need physical help. They shouldn't need mental help. They shouldn't need emotional help. They should be resilient and strong. And I think this is both a positive and a negative trait in masculinity because it is admirable when people don't need anything, when they're strong enough to get by. There is something about that is impressive and worth aspiring to, but not at the risk of not getting help when you need it.
Yeah.
And I think that is, it's a huge problem in society that we were sort of programmed to look at things through that lens. It's good to aspire to something, but you shouldn't aspire to it at the expense of something else. Mark, thoughts?
There's always been the statistic that men die younger than women, and that's probably because they do more physical stuff than women.
Do what stuff?
Maybe.
Because we're more dangerous. We live on the edge. We eat more bacon.
Yeah, you're more likely to damage yourself by being too butch.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on something there, Mark. It is butch. Eating meat is butch. Doing reckless things is butch. And they're not always good for us, physically.
Meat tastes nice, though.
It does. Apologies to any vegetarians or vegans, but...
She sat right here.
Because we're not being manly enough right now. Do you know what else I love? Sports ball! Moving on to masculinity and sports ball. Why are sports so manly? What is this tie between blokes and sport?
It's like a modern allegory for war.
I think you've summed it up in a sentence.
Okay, cool.
The thing about sports, right? I don't enjoy watching sports. I just don't. I don't want to watch the
Any
football.
of them.
I don't want...
Is there a single sport you enjoy? You went to see cricket the other day. How was that?
I went to see cricket and I enjoyed the lager. And that's the point I'm making, is I enjoy the social aspect of sports. I will watch football if I've got 5 blokes to sit around and be leery with. Because once in a while I want to be leery. Possibly not as often as you straight boys, but I do like leery and it is quite fun and it's I realise I'm bald, but it's letting your hair down. But I'm not interested in what sport it is. I don't think I truly understand the offside rule. I don't care, though, because there's lager.
Because it's a social activity.
Yeah, exactly right.
I avidly watch international rugby. It's something I've done since I was a child. I've watched the Welsh national side with my mother. Not my father, not a traditional, not a male bonding thing. More of a cultural thing, being part Welsh. And I played it a lot as a kid. And I went through several years of not watching it, and then towards my tail in university started watching it again, and I love it. But the other sport I watch is UFC, and the only sports I watch are contact sports. I'm not really interested in non-contact sports.
I quite like watching rugby, but I think my only point to make on rugby is those thighs. Whoa. Which, just because I want to put that link in the show notes.
Yeah, you make some assumptions saying you straight boys there, Mark.
Oh, yes.
Those thighs.
Thighs.
They're not for me. They're too big.
Too big.
Yeah,
it's not something you've ever said before, is it, Mark? Too big.
It definitely is something I've said before.
So, yeah, it's, for me, it's the physicality of it, the team element of it, the impressive athleticism of it. I can't enjoy football or soccer for Americans.
Soccer.
Because there's a lack of respect in the game, I think, for me. Whole other podcast on sports ball, but, that's two of the things I enjoy about UFC and rugby. The physicality of it, the athleticism of it, and there's a lot of respect in the games as well. And like Tom says, to an extent, it's an allegory of a war. Every Pacific Island international team does a war dance before rugby. It's almost a replacement for in those cultures. One of the reasons it's so popular over there is they have these warrior cultures, and it's a way for them to carry on physical traditions.
The haka, it's called, isn't it?
Yes, it's the haka in New Zealand. The Samoan, the Fijian, etc. have different names for theirs. The last sort of 2 points I've got here, we've got masculinity and family and career. Unfortunately, we live in a society where it's seen as more feminine to be raising a family and more masculine to be pursuing a career. I think that's changing. I know the company I work for is actively seeking to change that. It's created a working dads network as well as the working mums network. It's got flexi time for both as maternity leave and paternity leave. I think it's good that we're starting to challenge this. How did we get into a situation where it was that clearly gender defined?
Because men decided that was what they wanted.
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of that.
Quite possibly.
With men warriors, women... Like, at some point that happened, and then it got stuck in society for a long time.
Okay, and the last one is masculinity and identity. And we're going to get mixed answers here, due to the conversation we've already had, which is really great. How important, starting with Tom, is being a man to your identity?
So my answer might potentially surprise you here, I suppose. It's not always that important to me. Like, there are things that are manly that I like. I mean, I have a beard, I use beard oil, I liked going to the gym when I did it, but that was probably because, doing exercise is quite good for you and it feels good, but it's not super important to me. I don't go around defining myself as man, although I'm happy to do like silly voices that make me sound like that. I definitely don't go around being like, manly all the time. It's not a thing I ever have to really judge myself by. The nature of my work being in science, people judge you on your work as opposed to on how good you are at signing the deal or whatever. So it just doesn't come up so much for me, I suppose. And I think that's one of the benefits we have in society today is it's less needed. But yeah, I occasionally I feel nice and manly, and that's a good feeling, but it's not a thing I define myself by.
Mark, how important is feeling masculine or manly to you? I suspect, based on your previous comments, that it's not very.
No, it really is, actually.
It is.
For me, something happened the other day that really upset me. I don't see myself as a traditionally masculine man, but I like to think, a lot of the time at least, that I'm a role model as a man. But something that really shook me the other day, I've got a shaved head and I've got a lot of tattoos. And it was to do with basically, it was a cartoon, and the stereotypical cartoon of a racist was shaved head and tattoos, and I was like,
is this how people see me?
Shit. Yeah, exactly right.
Well, I assure you, no one who knows you thinks that. But I suppose the question is, could someone you've never met think that?
That's what I'm getting at. The way I dress doesn't necessarily emphasize...
Oh, God, no. Not with those fucking corduroys and some of those, hemp-style shirts. No, definitely not. And I assure everyone, this is quite a good look on Mark.
But I do have tattoos and a shaved head.
Yeah, quite a good look on Mark, but it's not something you'd normally associate with hyper-masculine, sports ball, beer-swilling thug.
But, yeah, still got the tattoos and the hair there, haven't I?
Yeah, but you've got to open your mouth and people would you're more like the bloke from the Crystal Maze, mate.
Richard O'Brien.
I have no problem with being like Richard O'Brien. But I mean, I think I find it personally gratifying. It makes me feel good. I don't know whether it makes me feel manly, but it makes me feel good that I can be an alternative male role model to big butch rugby player, doesn't talk about his feelings, doesn't cry, etc, 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 etc. Because I don't think I'm unmanly.
Okay, so for me, it's actually somewhat important, and it didn't used to be, but it became important when I was going through quite a bad depression after leaving university in a job I hated for an unethical company. And I rang a friend up crying in tears one day. He made me feel better. But I got through that by thinking of the role models for the first time in my life as an adult. Not as a child. I'd never done it as a child. But I thought about the role models and the people I admired in fiction, in comics, in fantasy, in life. And the strength, the resilience, the determination, the fact that you can't be worn down to the point where you're defeated in that way, got me through that period. And ever since, I've held on to it somewhat. And I'm very proud of some of the positive elements of masculinity I feel I display for my friends and family. For the majority of my friends and family, I've become a person they go to when in need. When they need advice, when they need someone to listen, when they need someone to display any sort of strength, even physical with my long-term health conditions. I'm still proud of the fact that I, with my joint conditions, lift more than most of my friends. These are sort of positive traits that I hold on to as a man, and it has become somewhat important to me. And I think that's maybe why I can be quick to jump to defend if people say men this, men that, because it is a part of my identity, as Tom said. I think it's important to me. Aisha, if you're still there, how important is being masculine to you? How important is it to your identity that you are or are not masculine?
For me, it is very important. I struggled a lot when I was a child with the fact that my body would turn feminine, and I didn't like that. And I was a very shy kid and very upset by that I was going to be female. It took a while to come to terms with my femininity, the parts of me that are more female, and that they weren't bad traits. But I definitely tried to put on masculine traits to the level I was comfortable with in order to try and get over being shy or being a bit weird. I don't know how successful that was. I think it was just a long process of sort of marrying both masculine and feminine identities. I feel good about myself when I think I look manly or I feel masculine. There are certain clothes that I just feel better wearing, and not every day I'm comfortable.
Like maybe a
female.
pantsuit feeling powerful.
Not every day I'm comfortable being masculine, but it took a while to get there.
So, I want to thank you both for coming on as guests.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
I think we've had some interesting discussion. Tom's got an awful lot of editing to do.
Nearly 2 hours of recording, yeah.
Again, but I think it's been salient. I think it's been good. Hopefully we've been respectful and covered a lot. And the real question now becomes, what is in the hat?
Indeed.
And of course, we would love to have you both on as guests again whenever we have a reasonably salient topic. Mark, I know we've got wrestling in there somewhere, so if we get on that, we'll definitely be after your expert opinion. I know you'd take any opportunity to talk about wrestling as much as possible, wouldn't you?
And books, and cats,
and books and cats,
and tea.
Those are. Tom How much would you love to do one on tea?
I would love to do an episode on tea, having previously blogged about it.
Add it to the list. It's not in there.
I will add it to the list. Aisha, would you like to announce what we got as a category?
TV.
Ooh. And now we'll pick the individual topic.
Drama.
Drama.
Okay, so next time on The Hat of Many Things, we will be discussing drama. Masculine noises.